Hi, everybody. Welcome. Very, very special privilege to welcome my dear friend and former colleague, Maggie Mills. Maggie is absolutely one of the best people on the planet, and I get to share her with you for the next hour, and I'm absolutely thrilled. Introduction, I'm going to let Maggie introduce herself. I want you all to know I'm monitoring both the chat and the Q&A, and we have lots and lots of things to talk about today. So as we go through our day today, I want you all to be prepared to ask questions. Maggie's got lots of wisdom to share with us. Many of you, as you registered, asked some great questions. We went through those yesterday, and we'll revisit some of those questions as we talk today. But let me also say that this event is created for you. And we do this every week at Demme Learning. We started this in the middle of the pandemic, and we found that this was a way to create connectivity for families. We don't limit your attendance to being a Demme Learning product user. We ask only that you join us in the journey, and we seek to make it more joyful. So if you would like to share the recording of this once you receive it, please feel free. If you know a family who would be blessed by it, please also know that in our Demme Learning Guild, you can find recordings of all the webinars that we have done this year, and you are welcome to share those out. Now that I've yacked, I'm going to turn it over to Maggie and let her introduce herself, and then we'll begin in earnest. So let's get started.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, first of all, for bringing me on the show. You're like my Oprah. And let me go back a little bit. The reason I'm thinking maybe Gretchen asked me to collaborate with her on this is that we met and worked together when I was managing editor at a homeschool publisher. And that included all kinds of work and a lot of writing, a lot of editing, and I've since moved on to almost all writing work now. I work as an author coach and a ghostwriter, an editor, and I still write marketing copy. If it needs words, I write it because I just can't help myself. I mean, I'm helping strangers I meet in a restaurant, like people who own businesses going, if you just put this up on your Instagram, So I do work with a lot of authors, and the subject of these family memories comes up a lot. And because I have this soft spot for homeschooling and for families, I could not wait to talk with Gretchen about this topic. I started making notes, and my file is entitled Capturing the Joy in the Homeschooling Journey, because I've heard so many joyful stories from people that have been handed down, and their children have now moved on through homeschooling. And there's just so much positive. And my only worry about this is that Gretchen and I are such good friends that she will be able to keep me on topic, because I get really enthusiastic. And Gretchen and I are able to expand on any number of topics. Let me just put it that way.
Well, I will tell you, part of the reason that I thought that this would be a wonderful topic for us to have a discussion about is because I am in the midst of conference season. And if you all have ever listened to me in a webinar before, you're thinking I sound like Kermit the Frog today. And there's a reason for that. I just came back from Cincinnati, Ohio, from the Great Homeschool Convention, and I literally talked my head off. So I left my voice in Cincinnati. I left my heart in San Francisco. I left my voice.
Your voice in Cincinnati.
But one of the things that I have been talking about in my presentations this year is, as homeschool parents, we are so hard on ourselves. And we tend to feel like we've got a long laundry list of all the places we aren't achieving our expectations. And I laughingly say about myself, when I reluctantly began my homeschool journey back in 1995, I had these visions of my children sitting around me on my sofa, and we were reading books, and then I was going to make bread, and it would be an awesome experience. And it was barely controlled chaos most every day. But I have to tell you, it was the most joyful 21 years of my life. And one of the things I think that happens is the nature of the human condition is we forget to count the joy, remember the things that were tough. But remembering the joyful things are the things that your children will want to remember 20 years from now. And so we're going to give you some very practical advice to help you record that joy in those tiny moments in the midst of your day to make this journey joyful. And here's a tip. If you record those tiny joyful moments, when you have those days that you're peeking out for the yellow school bus, you can go back to that information and prevent yourself from succumbing to the I can't do this anymore. Our goal is to keep you from the I can't do this anymore. So Maggie, let's get started. What I talked about yesterday with me was the fact that there are plenty of ways for parents to document their experience. But one of the things that we have lost in the age of the digital universe is time. So can we talk a little bit about some of the suggestions that you had yesterday for ways to capture that information?
Yes, absolutely. There's lots of little things. It's all about little things because this can seem so daunting. I need to record my family's history for posterity. I must write like Ernest Hemingway. No. I have some tricks that I use as a writer and my authors share with me and I share ideas with them. And a lot of it has to do with spontaneity. So first of all, I want to let people know you do not need to be thinking you got to write a book. It's about keeping these little bits of information, and we'll talk later about how to put them all together when the time is right. But I want to backtrack for just a minute because that's the way my brain works. We have all these ways about how to do it, and we're going to jump right into that. But as I was walking down the steps this morning, I'm going, oh, well, why should we record these memories? And you hit on one as little reminders that there is joy. And on the longer term, I'm coming at this from two directions. One, it's part of my profession. And I work with a number of authors, and memories from their childhood and their children are becoming very useful in the books they're writing. And these are all kinds of books. Some of them are professional, business-based books, how to do things. Some of them are teaching memoirs. I've been through an experience and I learned things and I had to do a lot of research and I want to share it with you now. They're not all strictly autobiographical, but being able to go back and look at notes you kept earlier in your life, it's helping future authors. A lot of these people never thought in a million years they'd be writing books. So if you're watching right now going, I'm never going to write a book, guess again, you might be writing a book. And then I'm also coming at this from the point of view of a parent. I have learned so much and I continue to learn every day now as the mother of a 29-year-old that these stories are important. You know, when our kids are blowing us off or not paying attention to us or making faces at some of the projects we suggest they become engaged with, it's still having a wonderful effect on them that they really appreciate later on. And I just spent a weekend with my son. He lives in Europe now. We do not see each other very often. And the whole weekend was about telling stories. And so when I was talking with him the other day, I told him, you know, I have this webinar coming up. And I said, I am the pot calling the kettle black. I need to start writing this stuff down right now because Granny has passed on and I'm starting to forget names. So I'm taking notes along with you and going, okay, you're telling everybody else to do this, you need to do it too. So one of the things writing for other people that I do is so silly simple. I keep a little journal in the door pocket of my car and a pencil. Now, I don't write while I'm driving. I don't suggest anybody write while they drive. I can barely drive while I drive. But there are these things called traffic lights and the cell lot at an airport. Our kids, maybe I don't know, my child would ask the most profound questions and make the most profound statements while I was driving the car. They ask the big stuff. And that's a good time to capture them. Or you'll have this great idea about something. So I keep it in the car with me all the time. And that way, also, if I go into an event, I take it inside with me. I take notes. So you don't have to actually use pencil and paper the way I do. I'm going to talk about that again later too. Anyway, you like to keep notes, voice recorder on your phone, little note apps. Just take these little moment to moment notes as you're going along as the idea strikes you. And that's very helpful.
Absolutely. And Maggie's actually given me an entree to something I learned from a parent this weekend. One of the things that I talk about this year at homeschool conferences is the organized homeschool journey, which might be an oxymoron, but the truth of the matter is I give parents a variety of tips, and I have colleagues here at Demme learning to give families the best of what we have learned. And eventually that's going to become a webinar. But in the interim, what I want to share with you all is this is a valuable device. And the reason it's a valuable device is because you can use it to tame the paper tiger. When we homeschool, sometimes paper just explodes. It looks like an explosion in a Chinese laundry as far as paperwork is concerned. So how do we keep up with that? And I might be the parent who has gotten up in the middle of the night to hide precious artwork in the bottom of the trash can so I don't get caught throwing it out. So I actually learned this from my daughter. Every Friday, she takes pictures of her children's artwork, and she has a file on her computer with each child's artwork. And I shared this last weekend in Cincinnati, and I thought that was a pretty good tip. And then I had a mom raise her hand and say, I do that as well. And at the end of every year, I take Shutterfly and I make a book of my children's artwork and writing samples from that year. And that becomes their year's memory. What a brilliant idea. How easy is that? Terrific way to be able to do that. Now, tangentially, Maggie and I are both writers. And one of the things I think that is really important, outside of public speaking, parents say that either teaching math or writing are the worst things they can possibly do. And so we want to encourage you that as you teach your children compositional writing, keep those records, because right about now, you've been at it since sometime late last summer. And those records of your children's writing experiences will improve over time. And how encouraging it is to a student to look back at what they did in August and look at what they're doing now, that growth and that journey. So that's a tremendous encouragement to families. Maggie, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about when we spoke yesterday, you said there's a downside to this, and that is what if it disappears? So can you elaborate a little bit on that as well?
I don't know where I got the saying. It could be because I attended Hardin Simmons Baptist University at one point in my life. And the saying goes, Jesus saves and so should you. We can save up. Sorry, I didn't mean to choke you up there. Hallelujah.
Great, I love it.
Yes, we can back up, and I do. I have all kinds of devices and everything backed up everywhere. But once you've been in the business this long, you will realize that you probably can't get the information off your floppy disk anymore, and that there are lots of terrific apps out there to make books and to write books and to make a book out of your Instagram posts. All of this technology is wonderful. I use it every day, but it so quickly becomes obsolete. But what does last is what has been old school, printed out. And I'm not saying you have to write it out in calligraphy. I have, and I'm so grateful for this, my son's maternal grandmother has a typewritten history of the entire family, starting from when they lived in Italy and they moved here. And I have put it in my safe. And it has now been very helpful for my son because he's living in Italy and he wants to visit these places. And what was her name? So go ahead and use all the modern technology. I do every day, but every now and then go ahead and print it out, because that is the most archival thing. And that's just it. I love my technology, but handwritten things or typewritten things, anything in tangible format is going to last longer.
Absolutely. I think that's a really true thing. One of the things that I wanted to share with you all is the idea that your children can be recorders of the joyful things as well. And when Maggie and I were talking yesterday, I was reminded of an assignment we gave to my eldest son. He was 10 or 11 years old, and we wanted him to learn to capture history in the form of questions. And so we kind of put my father-in-law up to it. So we had Lucas interview my father-in-law, Buddy. He was a World War II veteran, a very accomplished man, went to college on the GI Bill, started his own business and was very successful. So we sat around the table and brainstormed of questions could you ask Buddy to learn about him in the process of putting together this quote interview. And the interesting thing was we left it up to Lucas to come up with the top 25 questions that he would ask his grandfather. Now, this was before the age of Zoom, so it was a phone call on the phone because we lived several states apart. But when Lucas produced that document, the most fascinating thing about that whole enterprise for me was the fact that my husband said, I didn't know any of these things about my dad. And so the reason I encourage you is children's grandparents are now all passed away and gone. I encourage you that if you have grandparents in your life, to think about those questions, because the world is changing at a breakneck pace. And that would be a wonderful experience for your children and an edifying experience for their grandparents. So that might be something that could be part of your journey. Maggie, I know you have some great stories about some of the authors you've worked with. So tell me how you encourage them to think about their childhoods and the things you capture from them that might be important to them later.
Well, this is what makes a story interesting. It's the small details. We tend to get caught up in the factual stuff, which we need, the date somebody was married, when they were born, and the christening and the graduation, the just the facts ma'am kind of stuff. But what makes their books come alive, and the fun part of working with my authors, is digging a little bit deeper. And this is a reminder for the kind of things that you can keep track of. I had an author talking about going to her grandmother's house. Now, when we relate a story, we can see it in our mind. It's very vivid. But by the time we tell it, we've really edited it down to Twitter length. I loved going to my grandmother's house. Okay, well, let's talk about why. And so I get authors to start reminiscing. I say, okay, well, tell me about the house. Did she live in the city? Did she live in the country? Did you have to walk up steep steps to get to the house? Where was the kitchen? Did you walk all the way to the back of the house? What was she cooking? What did it smell like? What did your grandmother wear? And this really gets people thinking, and this is what evokes memories. And if you're sitting around with your family, at a holiday gathering, what are people talking about? Do you remember that time Uncle Ernie burnt all the hamburgers? These are the things that make us laugh. So I know we're probably thinking, record the journey, he got an A, he was a 4.0 student, but the things that mean the most to us are the sentimental things. So you're not trying to write a book all at once. You're just trying to keep track of some little details that later on you might do that. Whether you keep things in a box, little notes, programs from an event you've attended, or something as mundane as the seed packs from what you planted that summer. And those are the things the kids remember. I remember my son, I was astounded at this. He was telling his fraternity brothers about growing organic lettuce and the chickens and all the different colors of eggs from the chickens. And here was a guy in a fraternity, and I'm going, that is so not cool. But it had meaning to him. So record those things because
And
and
if
it's
you can teach
especially
your
important.
children to ask those kinds of questions and answer them. I have talked all weekend with parents who have said, I have the hardest time getting my, for some reason, it's always a boy. I have the hardest time getting my son to give me details when he writes a story. I had the privilege this past weekend of being with my youngest, who is 16, and he has watched me. I'm the mother who in the grocery store line strikes up a conversation, and her children are in the periphery behind me going, oh boy, we're going to be here for a while. Much about
This is
so many.
why we are friends.
And here, this might be why we are friends, but here's a tip for you all. If you can teach your children to be interested in other people and ask questions, it opens up a whole world to them that they might not even know. And this weekend was so much fun for me because my son Owen caught that idea. And we've joked for years, and Maggie has known him since he was a tiny tot, that he could sell ice cubes to an Eskimo. But he had some of the most interesting stories this weekend because he would engage people in conversation and then start asking them questions. And one of the stories that he related, I won't tell you the whole story, but the bottom line was there was an older man who was a security guard at the convention facility. And he was sitting in a chair at the top of the escalator. And Owen said he saw him the first day. And the next morning, the man was there in the chair again. And Owen said, how hard it must be to sit there all day. And I said, would it be hard for you? He said, oh no, because I'd be making up stories about people on the escalator all day long. But Owen went and found him at one point in time and said, how did you come to be here? And tell me what your favorite thing is about your job. And he had a fantastic story. Now, to have a 16-year-old boy that would even ask that question is pretty unusual, except for the fact that he's been raised in a family where we've always told stories. Everybody tells stories in our family. And so he's learned the art of storytelling. And that's something you have to teach. And I think Maggie can talk about how do we elicit that, particularly when you've got a kid who is just quiet. They're the observers in the room, but they're not the talkers in the room. So how would you get there with a kid?
I think they're listening when we don't know it. And the quiet ones, and I work with a number of people who are reticent to do that, but they're locking away all that information. It's just a challenge for them to share it. And book writing and memoir writing is actually an activity where they can feel comfortable in their own space, recording what they've heard. And I also have a friend, an adult, very accomplished business person who's very introverted. She likes to attend events with someone who's a little more extroverted, and we complement each other. So introverts and quiet kids, it's not that they don't like people or want to be around them. They don't want to initiate and have that focus on them. So giving them an opportunity to record all the things that they're picking up on. They're wonderful observers. And, I'm wondering sometimes if they might not be better observers because they're not trying to keep up and contribute. They can sort of listen to what everybody else is saying. And maybe they can be your recorders. Um, that might be where they feel more comfortable.
That's true. One of my daughters, her family nickname was the Remembery Girl, because if I needed to remember something, like I needed that to remember to put the laundry in the dryer when we got home, Shelby was the kid I told because she would remember it. I wouldn't, but
Mhm.
and another one of my children is, you know, occasionally the homeschooling environment is there appears to have been a struggle. What happened here, you know? And if I wanted to know the go down from A, my quiet son was the one I would ask because he could say who threw the first punch and he could say what happened next. He could even tell you what the sentences were up to the first punch. It's amazing. So, one of the things that I think we as homeschool parents need to remember is it's up to us to find that talent within our children and help to pull it out just a little bit. And Maggie, I know that you do this professionally. So, what are some of the kinds of things you ask your clients to get them to uncork their memories? You just went through a laundry list of what it was like to go to your grandmother's house. But what do you do when you get back? Oh, it was nice. How do you
And
change nice
that
to
does happen. I was interviewing um, an ENT, ear, nose, throat specialist for a newspaper article years ago. And I am like, I don't know anything about this. I mean, I know what eyes, ears, nose, throat. I don't know what they all do. Ear, however they combine that. See, I'm not good with medical stuff at all. Something up here. So I've got to ask questions, trying to make this guy sound interesting for an article. And it took a couple of meetings to get him to warm up. And this was all done on the phone. And by the second meeting, he just casually mentioned, because people do not realize how interesting they are and what cool stuff they have to share. It's just every day to them. Oh, every other month he travels to Africa and gives free medical treatment to children who can't afford medical care. And I said, back up, hold on, tell me about this. How did this get started? How long have you been doing it? And tell me the types of things you do. And then he became fascinating. It takes a while to get to those details. And I've just learned this through trial and error, through interviewing people for a number of years. And a lot of times, appointments are set up for me. We need you to talk to this person and interview them because we need to have their bio on this proposal or on our website. So I will schedule 2 short meetings instead of 1 long one, because that can be very intimidating to people. And I just get them talking about something that they're comfortable with. Sometimes that's not what I need to interview them about, but find some common ground. Where they grew up, where they went to school, something that is easy for them to talk about, that is fact-based, that doesn't require an opinion. And then you develop a rapport, they feel more comfortable, they're not so intimidated about, I have to get the right facts here and say all the right things about my company. Because when it becomes more of a conversation, that's when the really good stories come out, when they're comfortable.
I think one of the things that we can do as parents is to model for our kids observational skills.
Mhm.
And I'm about to tell you a story of sword because in my family, we always played a game called Tell Me a Story. So we would be out as a group, and you would see an older gentleman walking with a younger gentleman. And I would say to the kids, so tell me a story. Amazed. And it takes a while, particularly if you have that reticent child, it takes a while for them to be creative in that sphere. But being able to put yourself in someone else's sphere and mindset. I remember my daughter said, Well, I think that's a father and a young man who's not his son. And I looked at her and I looked back and I said, well, where do you get that idea? And she said, well, because look at the two of them walking sort of separate. And as they walk through the crowd, they stay the same distance apart. I hadn't noticed that at all. And I said, so what do you think they're doing together? And she said, well, I think he's a volunteer for the boys club and he's taking this young man out. And that young man doesn't trust him yet. And I said, so how is that going to change as they spend more time together? And she said, well, if you look, they're not really looking at each other. They're both kind of looking the same direction. But as they spend more time together, they'll be able to step into each other's world and then they'll walk closer together and they'll share more time. Now, the reason I tell you this story is because that child that shared that story of my three daughters was the least likely to have cogent observations. She was my quiet child. And I vividly remember the story because I didn't realize how carefully she was observing until that moment. And she was 10 years old. So now I encourage you to look at your homeschooling journey through your children's eyes. It can be a two-edged sword because you might hear some things from them that are hard lessons for you. But just as we spend an inordinate amount of time with a notebook trying to figure out what does our homeschool year look like, and we weigh curriculum and we weigh, how much time invest in this history curriculum and those kinds of things, we should be weighing how we're investing that time in our children. And I think that as parents, the other place you need to keep a notebook is beside your bed. Because if you don't have teenagers yet, you will someday. And I think Maggie can testify to this. Teenagers unwind and start telling the truth right about the time you're exhausted and really want to go to bed. And so if you are prepared with a notebook, and I'm not saying that you should be sitting there interviewing them at the time, but
wait till they walk out of the room.
Right. Just jot down a note or two about here's the interesting thing that we talked about, because that gives you insight into all sorts of things, how they're thinking, where their cup is full, maybe where you as a parent need to endeavor to fill their cup in the next couple of weeks. Maybe they have a friend who hasn't treated them very kindly. And maybe it's up to you to figure out how to help them unpack the feelings around that treatment and how not internalize that it's about them. That might be a wonderful opportunity for you as you are doing a little bit of documentation to keep in mind that your kids have things that they would like you to know and that they would like you to say. So Maggie, let's talk about how as a parent, what's important for me to capture? And you've talked about keep the paper copies, but how do I kind of turn this into a family story? How do I go from all these little pieces of paper into something that's coherent?
Okay. Again, this can be intimidating and it can be fun for people. It can be a lot of fun. And much like there are many learning styles, there are many book writing styles as well. So the first suggestion I will make is don't feel like you need to follow some formula. You're going to find what's right for you. Because I hear writers interviewed and they'll say, I decided that I need to approach this as a job, and I set aside this time every day at exactly 8 a.m. and and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write. Well, that might work for some people, and that might put outrageous pressure on other people. The first step is keeping all of this stuff, break it down into very small things. Second step is getting it organized, finding all the pieces. Definitely have other people contribute. Don't feel like you have to do this by yourself. Have the kids write books. It could be a family project. Have the kids, as you've mentioned, interview people. Something that I'm finding very helpful right now for spontaneity is we're all on Zoom, and you can have that transcribed and then keep the transcription. So when you start writing, let's say you do decide, I want to write a family book. It sort of goes back to your training with homeschooling. Start with an outline, but don't be intimidated by the outline. The outline is a living document. I had an author turned over to me from a publishing company. She had spent months and thousands of dollars hiring professionals to help her write an outline. She was so intimidated. And so I break it down like this. 10 bullet points. You're going to have an introduction. Why am I writing this? Or why am I qualified? And for our family memories, I want my children to understand things that were going on. Now that they're older, maybe they'll see it differently. Or some people document things because they've been through a medical journey, and having that information is helpful for future generations. So you have an introduction, and you're going to have an end. You're going to have a final chapter where you wrap it all up. So there's 2 chapters right there. With this type of book, you can go chronologically, and don't get carried away. I see people trying to write an entire novel and an outline, bullet points. You don't even have to get hung up on the name. Start with the name of the chapter. Billy was born. Thank God it was over, And then like no more than 3 bullet points. And then start writing to your outline. And you will realize as you start writing, your outline will change. You are not married to the outline. People, I love it when this happens. I love it when it happens. It is a starting point, and people will get into the middle of a chapter, and then they watch it blossom, and they go, oh my gosh, this could be 3 chapters. So don't think because it's not in your outline that you can't write it. If you're inspired and it's interesting, keep going.
So
I have never seen the outline and the finished product be the same thing.
That's funny. That's funny. And you know what? I think this is also tremendous encouragement for parents who are in the process of trying to teach their kids to write. That, one of the things that we say in our writing product, which is Write Shop, is that the most important part of a writing assignment is the brainstorming before you ever begin. And that is absolutely essential for parents to recognize that that's where all the work is. That's where the work and the effort happens. And the end result is a compositional writing. When we talked yesterday, you said something that was really important. And I want to turn my attention to some of the questions that we were asked before it gets too late, because we're already 37 minutes into this gig. But remember yesterday when we were talking about photographs, and how do you remember who's in the photograph and what it's taken for? So can you talk a little bit more about that?
This is where it's a double-edged sword. We record a lot of things on Instagram and on Facebook, and there are ways for downloading all of those. And what gets lost, we've got beautiful images, but what gets lost very quickly was, I know that was so-and-so's friend, but what was her name? You need to record that right away. And I'm fortunate that in my family, there were these old-fashioned albums that go back to like the 30s. And they dutifully wrote on the back of every photograph who it was. So that has to be written down right away. And it's one of the reasons where I say, creating from an app, those books are great, but there's not a lot of room for writing content. Definitely keep your photographs. And if you are doing everything online, there are ways of tagging them now in iPhoto and all of that. You can go back into the information. It takes more time, but you'll appreciate it later. And I love the point you made about all the work done ahead of the writing, because that's where some people can get really discouraged and derailed, is if they have to go look for something. Gather as many things together as you can before you start. I'm working with an author now who gave me a list of 20 people from the last 30 years of his life. He goes, okay, he sent me everybody's contact information, their telephone number, their email, and he goes, okay, I've told them all I'm writing a book. Okay, you're writing my book. I've told them all I'm writing the book anyway, but you're going to go interview them and get these stories from the last few years. That's one of the things you can include when you're getting everything together, all the people you want to talk to about it and their contact information.
That's a terrific idea. I think one of the things, I know I talked to several parents this past weekend who said, yeah, my first child had this beautiful baby album with all these photographs in it. And then my second child, and I'm going to describe my family. My second child had a baby announcement and maybe 10 pictures. And my third child's album had an ultrasound. And there isn't a picture in there. 4, 5, and 6. They're like, did we exist? And I've had this giant box of photographs that sits in my living room. I dragged it out to my living room because it sits there hulking, waiting for me to find the time to start going through and labeling those things and beginning to remember that happened in some sort of chronological order. So don't be me. Figure out a way, if you're going to print photographs, to label them, or if you're going to leave them on your phone, then take a cheap notebook and write down, like this weekend, we took 20 photographs on our trip. Owen probably took 100, but I only took 20. But one of the things that we took pictures of was, in the Atlanta airport, are 7 or 8 sculptures that are all made out of crayons. And they're the coolest things of those. And then as we're walking through the airport, I said, so what did you think of those crayon pictures? And he said, man, they were really cool. And I said, if you were the artist, how would you feel about that? Here you are putting together this thing and you're gluing like 6 million crayons into one piece of artwork. And he said, yeah, I know. Who came up with that idea? So one of the reasons that I suggest that to you is because if you can help your children be the observers so that they can see how things fit together, then it can be to their advantage as they grow in order to tell stories. So I'll share one picture with you all. I think this is so amazing. This picture, if you can see it on my phone, is a polar bear sitting in the water, and he has a penguin sitting on top of him. And so this was an opportunity for us. We actually went up the escalator to see what the polar bear looked like from the top. And it took a little while for us to envision that. But I could imagine that if I was still teaching creative writing, here's 2 photographs we took out in public, and there's a story. And all I got my student to tell a story. And there's a memory connected to that as well. So if you can learn to document those kinds of things, and Maggie talks about taking that documentation and creating a book with it. I'm just talking about writing it down so you can remember it later. And that makes all the difference in the world.
One of the questions that came up that I think is really important, and you did as well when we saw it, is that some people don't feel comfortable with writing, and it stops them from even beginning. And there's my dog decided to dream while we're talking. It's going to get back. I'm going to try to nudge her awake. I understand how intimidating that is. And even though I write for a living, I can feel that. So you need to walk away from perfection. I see my authors, they get stuck on a paragraph and they'll try to rewrite it 3 times. Do not write for perfection the first time you're recording your notes. And if you're recording this just for family and you're never ever going to make a book out of it, it matters even less. It does not have to be perfect. No one is going to be grading it. And just get your thoughts down. You clean it up later. Most of book writing is done in the editing stage. I saw an interview with a writer the other day who said his book went through 26 rounds of editing.
Oh my.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you know, we as parents think when we teach our kids to write creative, it should be an easy process. And it's not always an easy process.
Yeah.
So here's a suggestion for you all. How do you document the journey when you have an infant and a toddler and kids pinging off the wall? And I have a suggestion for you. When my kids were growing up, we had what we called a round table. And it was, we had a special lunch on Friday. Every Friday that I was home, that I wasn't traveling for our homeschool conference, we would sit down together and somebody got to choose the menu. You know, maybe it was peanut butter and jelly, maybe it was spaghetti and meatballs. There were a wide variety of different things. The food wasn't as important as the conversation. And what I wanted to do was encourage my children to think about what were the terrific things that happened in this week.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's hard when you've had a heck of a week and the baby's been ill and the toddler's teething and the teenager is full of the drama of being a teenager, to remember what those cool things are. So if you as a mom can just sit down and say, and maybe you want to do this at dinner, I want around the table and tell me one terrific thing that happened today. That might be a terrific way for you to document your journey in an easy way. Now, Maggie, we had a parent say something that was so fascinating. Both of us thought we wanted to talk about it a little bit. And that was, she said, I need to land the plane. And I think we both kind of had a different interpretation about that, but we got a giggle
I was
because we were like,
kidding.
yeah, okay. So what do you think about? You need to learn.
Okay, I have to tell you where my mind went. Literally landing the plane is where my mind went. I'm sure she was speaking metaphorically, but I got literal because years ago, I was hired to write an article about AOPA, the Airline Owners and Pilots Association. So I had to go to an airport, interview a pilot, and I knew I was going to go up in this small plane, and I was very nervous about it. At the time, I was driving a Subaru station wagon, and I get to the airport. It was Glen Martin in Maryland, and my mother had worked there during World War II. So I was kind of excited to see the airport again. And I am wringing my hands now, thinking about this. I'm getting all sweaty. And the first thing I wanted to do is get a good look at the pilot to make sure he was sober. Because that's the advice I give to my son every time he flies. I go, shake hands with the pilot, make sure he's sober. And I'm trying to, so we sit down and I'm interviewing him about becoming a pilot and how many hours and blah, blah, blah. And I'm trying to drag the interview on because I don't want to go up in that plane. I was so scared to go up in this little plane. And I can't drag it on anymore. We go out to the plane and, oh, yay, we got to go through all the checking process. And, this works and that works. And I go, oh, yay, safety. Let me write every bit of this down in incredible detail. And then we go up in the plane. I go, okay, I'm not dead yet, but let me tell you, the inside of this plane is no bigger than the inside of my Subaru station wagon. And I'm flying over Baltimore, and then there's water. And I'm going, oh my God, I'm thousands of feet in the air in a Subaru with wings. And he goes, okay, you're going to take over the controls. And I went, no. He goes, oh, yes, you are. And he took his hands off and, you're flying the plane. I'm dying. I'm like sweating buckets like a cartoon character. And then he says, now you're going to land the plane. I'm going, I cannot express the horrendous fear I had going through all of this. And then he cut the engine and then the fear is increasing. And I'm thinking, can you die from fear before I even hit the ground? and I land the plane. I landed the plane and we didn't die. So every time I fly now, I feel more comfortable in a giant commercial 747 thinking, I've landed a plane. Just in case anything goes wrong, I've landed a plane. So I'm afraid when she said she's got to learn to land the plane, like literally land the plane. And also perhaps that means at some point she needs to start writing.
Well, I think Maggie has just given you a terrific metaphor for homeschooling because that's what it feels like sometimes. Your palms are sweaty and you're like, I don't have control here. And what is happening? And how am I going to make this happen? And if you have faith in the process, it's a wonderful experience and you can really make it absolutely out of this world. So I want to encourage you that as you walk through this process to find that joy. I use this quote at the end of many of the homeschool conference talks that I give. And I always say that now you'll know how old I am because this is my favorite non-biblical quote. And it comes from Grady Nutt, who's the pastor on Hee Haw, that laughter is the hand of God on a troubled world. And I think we need to encourage laughter in our families. We need to find that joy. We need to find that stroke of encouragement that is sometimes missing. So we have now nattered on for 50 whole minutes. And I could probably do this all day with Maggie, but we probably need to bring this plane in for a landing as well. So Maggie, give me 3 or 4 thoughts of ways a parent could briefly capture memories as they go through their homeschooling journey.
Oh my goodness. A recap of capturing them.
And see here, this is called, it's a good thing we're really good friends because I just put her on the hot seat, but she's not fussing at me. So,
Oh no. Well, I'm looking around at how I've captured. Some people might call me a hoarder. I just call myself a maximalist. I've kept all these little bits and scraps from things because they do remind me. Tickets, and I put them in a vintage suitcase and I can open them up and look at them. I have my father's glasses from years ago. I save little tidbits because every time I look at one, and I have an entire table full of photographs, every time I look at these little things, it brings back the memories. It's tangible stuff. And
so I'm going to stop you there for a hot minute
yeah,
because I know Maggie, and I want to tell you something that Maggie does that I think is absolutely incredible. She has beautiful silver, she has beautiful china cups, and she uses those all the time. She has in every room of her house. In fact, if you look really carefully in the picture where she's sitting right now, you can see these 2 beautiful little lamps on her fireplace. Every room in her house has little tiny lamps, and every lamp has a story. And there's things in your life that have a story, and your kids are going to need to know those stories when you're gone.
oh
So,
yeah.
writing down why they're important and dear to you, there's a reason why you keep things. So,
Mhm.
what's the reason? Maybe where you need to tell some of those stories is Maggie's got some teacups that are absolutely astonishingly beautiful. And I've heard some of the stories about the teacup that belonged to her grandmother and the teacup that her friend Joelle gave her on a crazy trip. And those are the kinds of things that you need to remember and that your kids are going to want to remember when you're not here to remember it for them.
Don't just pack them away, use them.
Yeah. So now I interrupted you, so I'll let you get
That's
back.
okay. I would have derailed anyway. What was I? You have to tether me. It's like I just go off like this. I do. It
Uh,
makes for a challenging interview, but it helps with my writing career because I can just go on about any topic, including things I know nothing about. I can just go on and on.
I will tell you all that one of the coolest things I have seen in the past 10 years is I visited a friend who has multiple children, 8 or 9, sometimes I forget, but they have what they call a memory wall. And so they have a wall in their house that's painted with chalk paint, and they write memories and things on it. And periodically, mom will go through and write them down and clean the wall, and then they get to play again. Which reminds me of a story. When my eldest son turned 16, he said, "Mom, I want to repaint my room." I'm like, "Cool. Does this mean I'm painting it or you're painting it?" And he said, "Oh, no, I'm going to paint it white." Now, if you knew me, you know I have a white room in my house. But I said, "Why are we painting it white?" Because he invited all of his friends over and gave them Sharpie markers and let them decorate the walls of his room. And they drew pictures and they wrote poems and they told stories. And I have to tell you that when we left that house, that was the hard room to leave, because he took the opportunity to have a birthday and create a memory. So maybe you need to let your kids deliberately Sharpie marker a wall with memories and create those kinds of things. And that might be a wonderful thing for you and your family. Maggie, do you have any thoughts for our families as we conclude today?
Don't try to decide now what's important and edit out. Keep it all, edit later, because what's important to us changes. And I think that story is a perfect example. You were facilitating something he wanted to do, but at the end of it, it was extremely meaningful to you as well.
It
Our
was.
feelings change about things. Don't try to decide now, it's not important. Later on, when you go through the big box of stuff, or you know what, let your kids go through the big box of stuff and let them decide. You don't have to make those decisions now.
Absolutely. We want to thank you for trusting us to join us this afternoon. I think this was a little bit different webinar from the things we usually do. We try and keep it very practical, and we're guiding you down the road in the path. But I think this is the heart side of the journey. And I hope we have offered you encouragement today. I hope we've made you smile. I hope we've given you food for thought. And I hope you'll join us again and trust us to share more with us as we at Demme Learning journey along the road alongside you. You can go to our website, demmelearning.com/guild, and you can find these webinars there. You can find more information for the journey. And one of the other things that we have created is called the Support Center. So I want to conclude my conversation today with talking a little bit about the Support Center. I know as you journey along the road, any one of our products, be it Math UC or Spelling UC or Analytical Grammar or Write Shop, there may be questions you have about how do I, and that Support Center may very well answer those questions for you. Don't journey by yourself. If you need us, pick up the phone and call us. Everybody at Demme Learning who is a frontline assist to families has either been homeschooled or joined homeschool families in the journey for years. And we're here to help you make that journey a joyful one. Maggie, thank you so much for this amazing day and this amazing hour. I'm so grateful for you. And thank you to everyone who joined us today and those of you who will watch the recording. We'll look forward to hearing from you, and you're joining us again in the future. Take care, everyone.